Hello, my name is Tammy Fredrickson, and I am the founder and ministry coordinator for Operation Soldier's Heart, which is a ministry that we have here at Celebration Church for our military and first responders and their families. A lot of people know me as the veteran's wife. We've shared my husband's story. He is a combat veteran who served in the U.S. Army. And so we've shared our story, or he has shared our story, with our journey from being a soldier and serving in combat to civilian life, and the journey that we've walked with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. But I have a story of my own that I am hoping to share with you today. My struggles that I have, I wanted to share my struggle, and that is with anxiety and surrendering that to God. I've been on both ends of the spectrum. As I mentioned, I've been on the one end with my husband where I've been a caregiver and watching a loved one suffer through anxiety and stresses of that. But I've also been on the other side of the spectrum myself, where I have had episodes of crippling anxiety and trauma in my own life. So I'm hoping that whichever side of the spectrum that you're on today, that this will spark and ignite some hope for you, some encouragement, to know that you're not alone, that you're in good company, and just to be able to encourage you in your walk and in your healing today. Anxiety is not something that I've always struggled with. Up to my 20s, I have no recollection of any major episode. I may have been anxious about a test or getting into a school or a competition or something like that, but nothing out of the ordinary. I was raised in church. I had a lot of knowledge of God. I was raised in a loving family. Had a big support system. I had a lot of very sweet people who poured into me and planted seeds in my life that later on in life were very imperative in my story. Unfortunately, I had a sheltered look on life. I thought everyone was the Good Samaritan, that life was a fairy tale, there would be a happy ending, and if there was any kind of evil, that would quickly just be overcome with justice and good, and like I said, just live out that fairy tale life. Unfortunately, in my 20s, all of that was distorted, and I began to quickly see what the world truly was. All of that knowledge that I had went out the door as far as God and who He was. There was experiences in my life that brought on various forms of trauma, and there were gateways to trauma in my life. I won't go into a lot of detail about that for the purpose of today's real talk, but I do want to touch on what some of those traumas were so that you can understand where all the anxiety is coming from. So in my life, for about 10 to 12 years, there were various incidences of trauma, and they happened one right after another pretty much. For a long time, I didn't feel like I could hardly keep my head above water because things just came back to back. There was a lot of health trauma. There was malevolent trauma, things that were done to me, which resulted in consequences and choices that resulted in moral injury. There's been a lot of cumulative stress in my life, and also I've had secondary trauma. As I mentioned, my husband, the combat veteran, a lot of times when you're a caregiver or a spouse, it's easy to take on the same traumas that they have and mirror the symptoms that they have. So I was exposed to all of that as well. And I had a lot of loss. There began to be some brokenness in my family. I lost my two best childhood friends very early on to various forms of cancer. So there was a lot going on in that time frame. And so in that, I didn't know how to process it and how to handle it. I didn't understand the effects that it would have on me in the present time or the future. So the only way that I knew to cope was just to hide in my work. I just began to work long hours. I became very performance-based. I was a single mom at the time, working 3 jobs and going to school. for my bachelor's and then my master's degree. So I kept busy and hid behind the busyness. Like I said, I had the knowledge of God, which turned into a very warped view of God. I felt like I was out of His will, that I'd outsinned Him, that I was being punished for something, and there was no way to communicate with Him. I didn't know how to proceed with any of that. I didn't feel like He could help me, because I really felt like He had done all of this to me for whatever reason. So the way that I handled it was I just began to cope myself. I put Tammy on the throne of my life. I quickly began to try to manipulate circumstances and situations and try to control and conjure up my own outcome of life. But we know that we can't do that. So then I started to build up walls to block people out, to protect myself from being hurt again. I shut people out of my life that I shouldn't have, and then I started looking for love in all of the wrong places, and found myself in relationships that left me feeling very broken, very unworthy, and worn. With trauma, the important thing to understand is that the response of your body is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. With trauma is something that we could not control. It was something that's unexpected, that we foresee that could have caused bodily harm to ourselves, or death to ourselves or to a loved one. And traumas can vary. Trauma is in the eye of the beholder. Trauma could be, for one person, the loss of a pet. For another, it could be a divorce that they didn't see coming. It could be an assault. It could be a number of things. So it's important. One of the important things I want to get across is not to judge someone in their trauma, but also not to judge yourself or to judge your emotions that you have, because this is a natural response. It's the way that you're wired to survive what has happened to you. With my trauma, like I said, I was covering it up with all of my work life and social life and everything that was going on. But very quickly, my kingdom began to crumble. My emotions were exposed. My hormones were all over the place. With trauma, it takes quite a toll on you, with your adrenals, your cortisol, all these things that are going on inside. Things began to spiral out of control. I couldn't sleep. I suddenly started having tremors every day, horrible anxiety, panic episodes that there was a point in time where I was having 8 to 10 panic attacks a day. So walking through this, I realized I need to seek some help. It was enough to scare me, so I sought out medical help. And so thankfully, I was surrounded by a wonderful medical team who was able to diagnose. And over the years, my diagnosis wound up being depression, clinical depression, anxiety, generalized panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress. And so we were able to address the things going on chemically with supplements and medication. And I want to stop there with medication and break the stigma of that. It's okay if you need the extra help for any kind of anti-anxiety medication or anything that helps with the chemical imbalances in your brain. It doesn't mean you have to be on them forever. I certainly didn't have to be, but it is okay to have that. I was able to go into counseling and utilize therapy techniques that were very beneficial to my mental health. My doctor certainly addressed the physical health, and we were able to dial everything in and get everything in order. But there was still something missing there. I was still struggling, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So the other thing to understand in trauma is when we have trauma, it's full of lies and falseness. There's lies of things that we believe. There's a falseness where there's a false responsibility for what may have happened. Maybe you feel like you could have controlled the outcome of that. There's a falseness in the guilt that may be playing out in the trauma. So I had to go back to, with trauma, there's soul wounds. And so I had to go back to that and address my roots, if you will, and go back to some of those seeds that were planted earlier on in life to examine what was true and what is false. And just ask Him to help me bring forth the falseness and the lies and expose them and break them and be able to line it up with what is true. In that, I also had to walk through several steps in my healing process of forgiveness, of my identity, being able to see who I am in Christ, not what happened to me. I can't let that define me or be my identity of who I am. I'm not trauma, I'm not anxiety, but I'm who God says that I am. And that is free and set apart and restored and redeemed and holy and righteous. And all these things that the trauma the enemy tries to whisper in our ear and tell us that we are not. So I walked through the soul wound process, the healing in that. And there have been a lot of times, especially in the past couple of years, some health traumas have come back where, I think I have it together and I think I've got this under my belt, but there have been some things that He continues to show me in growing in Him. And so that is being able to trust Him and to trust that He is who He says He is. Before I didn't understand who this loving God was who would allow such things to happen. But now I understand that He is a loving God, He is a just God, and that we live in a fallen world. There will always be evil and sin, and there are things this side of heaven that we won't always understand. But I know that He is biding His time, and He angers with us, and He mourns with us, and He is biding His time until the day of judgment to take over that. So through this process, He has had me walking in a journey of surrender, being able to take my anxieties and to be able to surrender to that. 2020 has been a year where I think a lot of people, whether you have anxiety or not, it's been a lot of uncertainty. We found ourselves juggling between work and children being home now, a pandemic, there's a loss of truth, there's a lot of division, so that can bring on a lot of anxiety. For me, I don't want to sit here and look like I'm perfect and I have it figured out and everything is gone. These are things that I still struggle with each day, but each day I have to be intentional in my freedom in Him, and be, submit to the Holy Spirit and to be sensitive to Him and what His directives are in my life. If there's something that wells up in me for anxiety, it's being intentional and being willing to submit that to Him. Just recently my son is 16 and started driving, and that's enough to make a mother's heart go into any kind of tachycardia. Every time I see him pull out of the driveway, it's an anxiousness in my spirit. One of my health traumas that I've had before is with melanoma, which is a skin cancer. I recently had, that was 10 years ago, but I have to go every 6 months for checkups. So every time I go for a checkup, there's that anxiety that wells up in me. Will it come back? Is this the time? And so right now I'm waiting for results on 2 biopsies that I had to have done. So that there are still struggles that I have, but it's learning to submit to that surrender. And it goes hand in hand with the trust and faith. With surrender and being able to pray in your prayer life, it's being able to partner with God and partner with what His will is. There was a lady, her blog I read not long ago, that said her prayer was, God, I know you can. I pray that you will. But ultimately, when we partner with Him, we want to pray for what His will is in our life. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so when we can partner with Him, it's important to see that that's a way that we're not giving up, but rather giving it over to Him. That we take ourselves off the throne and give it to Him. There's a song by Lauren Daigle that I always love to listen to. It's called Once and For All. and it says, I won't sing it to you, but it says, let my kingdoms fall once and for all, once and for all. Or for him to be lifted high as my kingdoms fall once and for all. And he certainly is on his throne and does not come off of that. I wanted to close with my life verse, which is Genesis 50:20. It says, what the enemy meant for evil, God will use for good, and the saving of many lives. He has certainly taken times of very dark days, a lot of hopelessness, and taken that and given me beauty for ashes. He is a God of restoration and a God of hope. And so I pray that in this, like I said, whatever side of the spectrum that you're on, that this will ignite that hope, that you know you're not alone. It's easy to fall into isolation, but that's where community is important. And so I'd encourage you to reach out and take those steps and to keep warring on for your loved one or for yourself, and to reach out to others when you need it. And so I thank you for letting me share my story today.